Welcome everyone to the A&D. This is such an exciting moment for us to be able to welcome you for programs in exhibition space. And I will jump in with really like a generic introduction for everyone to understand why this is so important to celebrate Trina and her design in the context of modern architecture, because I hope that what you get at the end of that talk is how Trina has been instrumental in placing modern Californian architecture on really on the international map. Since 2008, Trina Turk has associated her eponymous brand universe and communication with modern architecture. And in that capacity, Trina's work and contribution is featured in one of the 5 sections of that exhibition, Fashioning Architecture, What the Runway Borrows from Architecture, which explores different approaches and relationships between the designer and the architecture they choose to present their world into. In contrast with Karl Lagerfeld, who has been oscillating between recreating archetypes of buildings such as supermarket as a way to contrast his high couture garment, or rebuilding idealistic vision of Paris that are illustrated here on 2 of the table behind you. In contrast as well with fashion designer John Galliano at Dior, who has tried to associate the brand with the orangery of Marie Antoinette. During the same years, Trina Turk was looking to California modern houses. And it was a unique positioning that Trina has crafted for herself and her brand, and we will do a very deep dive into that hopefully today. Also, occasionally using modern architecture as a runway, what Trina has been doing is really regularly shoot her lookbooks, which are another element in the communication of fashion and advertising campaign in these modern buildings. 2008, the Boleo House, and we have in the audience somebody who is wearing one outfit of that shoot, the Kaufman House in 2012, the Palevsky House and the Fretu House in 2014, or later the John Laudner Solkin House in 2017. Doing so, Trina Turk has picked up on the trend that was born about 70 years earlier at the Racquet Club. Racquet Club in Palm Springs was the first venue ever in the modern style that has been used as a backdrop for a fashion show. Picking up on that, but also maybe picking up on the fashion, it wasn't a fashion shoot, but the very iconic image that Slim Aarons has done of the Kaufman House with Nelda Linsk that we have been discussing in depth during a previous exhibition, The Modern Women. Each of these photographers, I mean Bernard of Hollywood for the image that you can see in that exhibition on the 2 walls over there, and Slim Aarons were trying to picture fashion from different vantage points. Bernard of Hollywood was trying to capture the runway. What was the relationship between the runway, which is when you reveal a collection, and the architecture that is hosting the collection? While Slim Aarons, while shooting Nelda Linsk and her friends at the Kaufman House, was trying to capture how the fashion was being worn by fashion prescribers. And what is fascinating to me is that Trina Turk has been blending the two in what she has been doing throughout the year 2000 till nowadays. And what it is, she has been capitalizing on the very cool factor of California architecture. And beyond that, she has not capitalizing on the cool factor. She has putting California on the map. Before Trina Turk does that, nobody does that. This is unique. this is impactful. And the first other people who really pick up on that after Trina does it is Nicolas Ghesquière when he brings its fashion show at the John Lodner Bob Hope House in 2015. This is extraordinary. And what I've been asking myself is like, oh, all of that did happen. How did you start that?
I guess one of the things that I thought of while you were giving that introduction, first of all, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Christine, for having me and including me in this exhibition. I'm in extremely good company, and so I'm very grateful to be included. Basically, Karl Lagerfeld can build a mini Eiffel Tower in the Grand Palais because he has the budget to do that. Whereas we live, the company is based in Los Angeles, and our interest, my late husband Jonathan, and my interest in modern architecture, it just, we weren't really thinking about what we were doing. We just liked these houses, and we had this young fashion brand, and it just seemed obvious to us that this is where we should do the photo shoots. He was a photographer. And so it really just happened because of our interests in modern architecture. And he first was a fashion stylist. And around the late 90s, a lot of people were shooting out here, including Tom Ford, for Gucci. And he found himself out here often as a fashion stylist. Many of the photo shoots were for GQ magazine, and Jim Moore had bought one of the steel Wexler houses at the north end of town. And so that was really sort of the impetus for looking for a house here. And then, of course, we found out about all these other amazing houses, and the photo shoots ensued.
And when did that arrive in the evolution of your brand? Because if I remember properly, you start your brand 1995. When was the first time that you visited Palm Springs? And when was the first time that you owned a house in Palm Springs that you wanted to use as a backdrop for your collection?
I think that Jonathan probably started the whole movement to have photo shoots, fashion photo shoots out here was, I would say, around 96, 97, 98. We started looking for a house. I mean, when we found out that Jim Moore had paid $180,000 for his house, we were like, oh, we better get to it. It's amazing to think about that now. But so we started looking, and we bought our house, which is the Ship of the Desert, which honestly wasn't exactly what we thought we had been looking for, because we thought we had been looking for a house that was classic Palm Springs mid-century, sliding glass doors out to the pool, one story, the whole thing, which you are all familiar with. I guess an Alexander house is what we thought we were looking for. And when we looked and looked and looked, and then when we saw the Ship of the Desert, it just felt more solid. And we lived in a 1930s Spanish colonial revival house in LA. And so there was something about the sturdiness of the 1930s construction that appealed to us. I mean, the house was kind of a dump, but so anyway, we ended up buying a streamlined modern house, which is not what we were looking for. But that was kind of the beginning. And we met a lot of people out here who also had come to Palm Springs because of, a lot of it weirdly was real estate oriented. We met design people from New York and San Francisco and all over the place, and became aware of all these other amazing houses to do the photo shoots in.
And how did you get your information? Because I've been doing a little bit of research to identify from when these architectures were known. And if I look, for example, at Albert Frey, prior 1998, which is the first time that there's a substantial publication dedicated to him, is not known. And that's true for many of the mid-century modern architects. Well, it was really confidential. So would you say that JQ has been the first source of information for you to get into that? Because you were in LA. So how did you know about these houses? How did you know that they were available?
Our interest in mid-century modern architecture really started through our involvement with the Los Angeles Conservancy, which is an architectural preservation organization in LA. And we went on different tours and events that they had, really seeing houses from all different eras. But there was one tour in particular that was mid-century modern architecture that was incredible. And it really opened our eyes to what was going on in, we lived in Los Feliz at the time. And there's a lot of amazing architecture in Los Feliz and Silver Lake. I mean, there is throughout Los Angeles, but there's sort of a concentration of mid-century architecture in Silver Lake in particular. And then when we were out here, there was clearly a connection. And so I would say through the Los Angeles Conservancy, and then in the early days of being in Palm Springs in the late 90s, Courtney from Modern Way, I feel like was a bit of a, networking hub. And he had all these clients who were shopping with him to furnish their mid-century homes. And, sometimes on the weekends you could find out from Courtney if there was anything going on. And that was sort of how we met a lot of these people who are still friends, who were in Palm Springs around the same time, doing the same thing of buying these mid-century houses, fixing them up. All of the interest in new construction had really moved down valley. And so Palm Springs was just sort of left here. And these houses, at that time, you could find houses that had never been touched. I think those days are kind of over. But anyhow, that was the beginning.
Yeah, so would you say that the availability of this architecture and the real estate market has been one of the drawer in?
Definitely at that time, because I think that, it wasn't until Jonathan was out here shooting all the time that he realized that you could get, an original condition mid-century house for around $200,000. And that seemed like something to look into.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And somehow, the real estate is one of the main driver in art, no matter what. The reason why for years, artists have been flocking to Berlin has a lot to do with the availability of lofty space that doesn't cost much. And here, many people had the opportunity to buy cheap real estate, but also probably it was a moment in the taste because you mentioned the paper in JQ. Zoos happened around 1998, and then, there is continuation at the top of the 2000. And I cannot stop thinking that it also coincides with the change in style and interest. And it brings me back to a conversation that I had exactly 2 years ago with Sidney Williams and Janice Lyle about, postmodernism and modernism. And I believe that when all these papers are being published, they strike a chord. People are getting fed up with Michael Graves, with, I shouldn't say names. are getting fed up with a certain type of architecture that seem to have totally derailed. And maybe, you want to look back. And when you look back, you're like, oh, what happened before postmodernism? And this is modernism. And you have that architecture that out of a sudden seems not to be outdated, but seems to be carrying the classical principle of architecture in different material. So, is that something that you felt or you were not at all like conscious or interested about it, and it was more like, oh, these houses were available, so we will probably like, because what I'm trying to get at is how well this choice informs as well the design, because I would like also that we discuss also what's the DNA of Trina Turk and how do you see it connecting to modern architecture. So I know those are 5 questions. So pick the one that you want out of
Let's
that.
start with postmodernism. We were not thinking about the contrast between modernism and postmodernism when we were looking for a house. We were just excited about these houses out here. And, in addition to the LA Conservancy, when Sydney and Janice were doing the symposiums at the Palm Springs Art Museum, you guys had some amazing tours out here. And between the Palm Springs Art Museum tours, at the time there was an Architecture and Design Council, and then also other organizations out here had, like Palm Springs Modern Committee, had tours as well. And, we were on all of them. And it was a lot of fun. And we saw amazing places. And so all of that kind of fed into the inspiration of continuing to do these photo shoots. As far as, what is our brand's connection to modern architecture, I think of modern architecture as really being about the materials, where you can see the materials and they're not hidden or they're not covered with molding and ornamentation. It's just, it's glass, it's terrazzo, it's whatever it is, and you can see it. And I think that the connection between modern architecture and what we do at Trina Turk is that the styles are very simple. There's not a lot of complicated styles, and we choose interesting fabrics or create interesting prints and let the material speak for itself. So, like what I'm wearing, it would be kind of ridiculous if it had ruffles and pleating and, all this kind of stuff. So it's just a caftan. And it's really about the fabric. And so, creating the prints is something that we're known for. I would say that the 3 words we always use to describe the brand are color, print, and optimism. And I think that optimism is also, like modernism is also optimistic. So there's that, the time when all these houses were built, it was post-war. People were really excited about having this leisure lifestyle in the desert. So the optimism is also a connection, but I would say that and then letting the materials speak for themselves.
I remember when we were preparing that conversation that you said also something very interesting. When you were visiting some of these houses in Palm Springs, you were like asking yourself, oh, what these people would be wearing.
Exactly. We bought our house in 98 and I don't know if you guys remember John's Resale Furnishings, but it was a vintage clothing store on Palm Canyon Drive, which is actually where our original store, the women's section of our Palm Canyon Drive store, was located. And we used to go in there, and whenever I went into that store, which I think had been an art gallery at some point in the past, I just loved the way the space felt. We did not know it was an Albert Frey building. We just knew that when you went in there, it just felt really good in there. There was windows in the front and windows in the back. And, it was quite simple. Like there wasn't anything fancy about it, but I just loved the light in there. And so, we decided, we talked about if that space ever became available, that we would open a store there. You know what? I feel like I've lost track of the question, but I'll just finish the story.
It's No, it's not, because it's very much related, because this is the connection between like your fashion with modern architecture and you like love of modern architecture because it's great architecture to start up with, and also I'm losing track of the question as well. So it's all great because, well, my next question was about like well, what is the background story of your store in Palm Springs? So this
Okay,
is that.
so we'll go back to that. So it was John's Resale Furnishings. We would go in there all the time because as all of these people we had met, we were all furnishing homes. And so anyhow, I just loved that space. And then it did become available on, we drove in on Labor Day weekend, 2001. And there was a for lease sign in the window. And so we were just like, well, should we go for it? And so we did. Weirdly, we signed the lease for that space on September 10th, 2001. And the next day was September 11th. And our very nice landlord, I'm sure, would have let us out of it if Steve Nichols, if we would have asked him to. But we just decided, you know what, let's just do it. And if worst case scenario, if it doesn't work out, at least we'll have sort of this beautiful backdrop for the clothing, because at that time we were selling quite a few of the department stores, Barney's, Saks, Neiman's. And when you would go into the stores, you had this idea of what your clothing was going to look like in the stores. And it was pretty much always disappointing because you would see, your little tea stand of clothes in this mass of clothes. So part of the Palm Springs store, I guess the exercise was creating an environment that we thought was beautiful. And we worked with Kelly Wursler, who was working on what was then the Estrella Inn. And now I don't even know what it's called. Avalon. Okay, yes. Now it's called the Avalon. She was finishing up on that project, and she was not really quite the rock star that she is now. And so she was actually very pregnant when she was working on the Palm Springs store. And so yeah, we opened, and we were kind of in no man's land at that time. There were signs that designated that neighborhood to be the Uptown Design District. But to be honest, it hadn't really come together yet. I feel like on the part of the city, it was maybe hopeful that it would become something. And eventually, like, there was no foot traffic, but eventually, I think that we were a destination at that time. And, people found us. And over the last however many years, 24, 25 years, the businesses have really filled in so that now there is foot traffic, which is kind of exciting.
Well, I would like to take us now a little bit back to that question of the fashion shoots in respect of architecture. And one project that I want to have you discuss or tell us a little bit more is that you have been repeatedly shot at the Style House. The Style House, we have a little model here that present the Style House in the context of its dramatic landscape. And well, when I started working on that exhibition, I was looking at all the photographies that have been taken at the Style House, and there's of course, an incredible lineage, which is not necessarily linked to fashion shoots, but to the promotion of modern architecture. And in that regard, Julius Schulman has been one instrumental person in building the perception around the Style House. And I was wondering, well, why did you pick the Style House? And when you are at the Style House, well, are you conscious of the different specific spots that you pick in the house when you do your fashion shoot?
Well, the Style House is not very big. And of course, it's an iconic home. I think that even people who are not interested in architecture have seen that black and white night shot where there's two women in the living room and, the lights of LA are spread out below. So being a Los Angeles-based company, that I think is the sort of the ultimate expression of fashion in Los Angeles. And, of course, many brands have shot there. There's a beautiful Valentino campaign that was shot by Stephen Meisel there, which I love that one. But to me, that house says Los Angeles. And I think that corner shot, of course, Julia Schulman picked the best angle. So I would say that is the best one. But, there were also kind of quirky details in the house, which we didn't use as much, but it was, it's pretty much as it was in the 60s. I think there's even like green shag carpeting on the walls of the bathroom. That's still there. But it's really just that corner with LA spread out below that is the most iconic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Julius Schulman was the first one really like to be somehow like the advocate for the soft power of California modern architecture. The second one that I mentioned earlier was Slim Aarons. Slim Aarons and the iconic shot of the Kaufman House. And you've done yourself a photo shoot at the Kaufman House, I think 2012 or 2014. I'm not sure any longer. So how did you decide to do a fashion show at the Kaufman House? And what is your relationship with Slim Aarons, if any?
I mean, Slim Aarons is the entire fashion industry looks to the images that Slim Aarons shot of, beautiful people in beautiful places doing beautiful things. And when I started the company in 1995, I had a tear sheet that was from Vanity Fair. That was it had a little thumbnail picture of the iconic, poolside gossip photo. And I had it pinned to my bulletin board at the time. I was working out of my house in Los Feliz. And I don't think everybody knows that photo now. But back then, I think that people in the fashion industry were very aware of Slim Aarons. But I don't think that photo was as ubiquitous as it is now, because especially here in Palm Springs, you just see that photo everywhere. But I had just pinned it to the bulletin board, and I thought, this is sort of what I want this company to be. And, it wasn't something that I was hyper focused on. There were other things pinned to the bulletin board too, that were mostly kind of American sportswear kind of images. And it was really at the very beginning. So I was not really positive what I was doing other than trying to start this company and not work for anybody. That was definitely a motivation. So yeah, that photo was part of it.
Yeah, but what's interesting, because you are conscious of that photo in 1995, again, that's really early. Because, I've been working for Louis Vuitton since 2011, between 2011 and 2023. And I actually bought a version of that in 2011. And most of the people in the company didn't know of that image. Some of the designers in the fashion studio knew about it, but they couldn't really place who it was. But most of the people actually didn't know. So there's a little bit lag in the knowledge and realization of the power of that image, certainly between the US and Europe, where I was. So again, what strikes me is that you've been doing these things much earlier than anybody. And I like that.
We were just doing what we thought seemed like the right thing to do. There wasn't really, it wasn't like there was that much thought. We were aware that we were shooting in mid-century houses, that Slim Aarons was an influence, but it just kind of happened.
Yeah, but what's interesting as well is that somehow your brand has started with sportswear, but it was Californian sportswear. It wasn't preppy Americana. And now you're probably a little bit more resort.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the influence of Palm Springs. Even though we're an LA-based company, people think I live here full time. At this time of year, I'm here a lot, but I definitely go back and forth between LA and Palm Springs. But I think that there was a lot of press related to our brand about Palm Springs and around Palm Springs. And so Palm Springs just sort of took on a really big, it took on a really big and important part of who people think of us. When they think of the brand, they think of Palm Springs.
Yeah, and I cannot think of a better, as better alignment with what you do in your fashion shoot, with picking this mid-century modern architecture, and what you do in terms as well of your collection and fashion. Because what you are selling to the world somehow is a cool California lifestyle. And you are really when I look at the images from Schulman's, Aaron's, and other advertising campaign, well, even from other brand, what I'm seeing is that, a style which is really selling and capitalizing and helping co-creating the cool factor of California. What you said about the color, about the optimism, but also that lifestyle that is only possible in California and in Palm Springs as well, because it has been a laboratory of architecture, because you don't have all these constraints that others do have in Massachusetts, on Maine. You can really develop your architecture with an extended space outside around the swimming pool. And what you are showing through your campaign and what you are selling as a brand is, for me, it's really the 21st century cool California resort style.
Thank you. I mean, I do think that people love photos that have swimming pools in them.
Yep. Yes.
They just, people just love them. Yep. So when we're shooting, it always helps if the location has a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And, we do swimwear as well. So sometimes we're actually in the pool. And we did a shoot up at the Frey House, Frey 2 house. And, the pool's almost as big as the house. So that's actually a perfect location.
Yeah, and again, you were one of the first to start that trend. And in the images that you see behind us, you will see images of recent fashion shoots that had happened in 2017 and 2020s. One is a fashion shoot that happened in the Frank Sinatra house. It was a fashion shoot for Objet Nomade, a branch of Louis Vuitton, again, that was photographed by Salvin. And they are just reenacting what you are doing in your photographs. And you can also look at one of the campaigns that was shot lately in the John Lautner house in LA for We Don't Company. They are doing the same. They are really using that very clearly identified mid-century modern swimming pool deck that helps link the house to the pool as their place of choice for a shoot. So from all the images, and you can see some of them on the table that is dedicated to Trina. Since 2008, you have repeatedly built and created a visual imaginary for your brand that has had an impact on other brands, either LA-based like We Don't or international like Louis Vuitton. And this is something which is kind of very unique in the industry.
I guess I'm not sure that I'm on their radar.
Well,
but these places are.
I can tell you. Well, you as a person is not on their radar, but the images that you print are certainly on their radar.
Okay, well, that would be nice if that was true. But I think that these locations are probably on their, the Sheets Goldstein house. Yeah. Is a John Lautner house in Los Angeles, and we have shot there. But it has this incredible pool. And once again, I think it was Versace that did a campaign there. That was also Stephen Meisel. I guess Stephen Meisel is one of my favorite photographers. And, I think that location is just amazing. And, I think it could go different ways. It can be kind of like dark and scary a little bit, like the villain lives there. Or, you know, it can be poolside, glamorous, whatever. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do have openings for a couple of questions.
So I wanted to ask Trina, what attracted you to Sea Ranch, which is a different California coastal environment, what attracted you there?
We, Jonathan and I, went up there with friends. I feel like the first time we went up there was probably 20 years ago. And these friends ended up buying a house there. And so we would go up there periodically. Of course, it was the architecture. That's part of it. But just an incredible landscape that's on the Sonoma coast. It's quite dramatic. The drive getting there is also quite dramatic. And we had no intention of buying a house there because there are so many great houses that you can rent. And this is before the Sea Ranch Lodge, which is one of the first buildings that was built there, had been restored. It's now restored. But there are all kinds of houses that you could rent. So it's like, why would you buy a house there? It's so far away. You know, you could rent a great house. But one weekend when we were up there, we were walking on the Bluff Trail, which is this amazing trail that just, you have the Pacific Ocean on one side and all this interesting architecture on the other side. And it's just, you know, amazing to walk on that trail. And so we crossed paths with somebody, a couple who owned a store up there called Placewares. And they said, hey, this Joseph Escherich's house is coming on the market. And, you know, do you know anybody who would be a sympathetic buyer who would not ruin the house? And we were like, they basically were telling our friends who lived there, you know, giving them the heads up. And so then, of course, immediately after this hike, we went and snooped around this house. Nobody was there, but we just walked around the exterior and kind of peered in the windows that we could see in. And then we had to go back to LA, but the following week, Jonathan went up there and met with a real estate agent and saw the house. And he basically called me and said, we have to buy this house. It's so amazing. It's only 850 square feet, so it's kind of like a cabin, but it's a very well-designed 850 square feet. And I think that, you know, the lure of the Sea Ranch is the architecture and the landscape. There's not a whole lot to do up there. You know, if you want to read a book, it's a great place to go. If you don't like to go out at night, it's also a great place to go. It's pretty remote, but it's amazing. And, you know, it was this sort of utopian community that was, you know, envisioned by a developer and these architects from UC Berkeley. And yeah, it's kind of another version of the California dream, I guess you would say.
So going back to the question that got lost, I think it was about I think what people wear at some of the photos that you look at. So just to bring that back to that, because I'm sort of curious about what inspires your patterns and your use of color.
So that's right. The question that I never answered was, you know, part of the sort of the whole concept of opening the store here was that we knew all these people who were restoring these mid-century houses. And so the question was, what are these people going to wear in these houses? That was part of the impetus for the store. I mean, what inspires the patterns? Anything could inspire the patterns. We have a huge archive of vintage clothing and textiles. I do think that some of the graphic quality of what we do was inspired by my upbringing. My mom is Japanese, and you know, there's definitely a graphic quality to Japanese design. And you know, I grew up in a house that was sort of it was a mid-century tract house. but we had Danish modern furniture mixed with Japanese stuff in the house. And so I definitely, like, not that I thought of it at the time, but I do think somehow that kind of sunk in. And, now we work off of vintage. We have a very talented textile designer who works for us. We could give her a little, picture of a painting and say, can we do something in this color story? Or, a print design could start from anything, really. So we work in many different ways. We also buy artwork. There are design studios that create artwork, especially for the apparel industry. There are companies that have purchased the archives of, French and Italian and Japanese textile mills that focused on printing. And, they own the rights to those prints and they actually will sell them. So we work in many different ways.
Trina, I remember asking you about the jewelry that was on a show that I liked. It was called Castle, and the mother of Castle wore this jewelry that was just costume, but so cool and so chunky and whatever. And I looked it up and it was all your jewelry. How did you get into designing jewelry for Hollywood?
Okay, this is interesting. We had a partner who we were doing jewelry with for maybe a 4 or 5 year stint. So I'm not sure if, I don't know. That was probably, I would say, 10 to 15 years ago. I loved working on the jewelry. It was kind of the first thing that I did that was actually hard, not a textile-based, product. But the problem, we couldn't continue the jewelry because of the minimums involved. You had to order a certain amount of each piece, and we couldn't really support it with our business. So I'm not really sure what Castle is. Oh, the TV show. Okay, yes. Okay, so I knew the costume designer, Luke, and he and Jonathan actually were on the swim team together. And so I think that's how that connection happened. But I love that jewelry. I still have a lot of it. And I wish I would have saved one of everything we did with that company, because it was definitely mid-century inspired. I would say like late 60s, early 70s inspired. Lots of enamel, lots of resin for color. And it was short-lived, sadly.
Well, just since we're talking about architecture here, will you talk a little bit about the Soleil House? And some of your inspiration, that was something when we saw that come up on Modernism Week, that you had done that. There was no doubt that, we had to go and see it. It's really, really incredible.
Thank you. That was just, I love old houses, obviously. And that house had been sitting there near my friend James's house. And I was just curious about it because of the site. And so anyway, we walked up there, we checked it out. This was during COVID. And the house was in a terrible condition and had junk strewn all over the place. But anyway, there was something appealing about the site and the kind of architectural bones of the house. And I had been thinking about trying to find a house or a tiny hotel to redo in the spirit of our clothing brand. So that was kind of the creative mission of that project, was to show color, because I think there's a lot of beige decor out there. And in Palm Springs, I think people do embrace color, but there was also this kind of thing that's happening here where people are buying mid-century homes now, and they're kind of like blowing out all the walls, painting everything like a really blinding white. And I feel like the character of these homes is sort of being lost. And a lot of times the intimacy of the homes and some of the details that made them so special. So what I wanted to do was sort of revive this house and hopefully maintain some of that kind of coziness and also express the Trina Turk brand in a space that's not a retail space. So that was sort of the purpose of that project, and it was really fun. I had a great time. I mean, I actually love construction. Some people can't stand construction, but I really love the process. So it was fun. It was about a year-long project. I think that was pretty fast for what we did. But anyway, thank you for mentioning that.
And I think we have time for one more, if there are any other questions in the crowd.
I have one.
Oh, we'll give it right back.
What's next?
Maybe the tiny hotel? I don't know.
Oh.
No, the thing is I don't really want to do something that has already been done like in the 90s or the 2000s. Part of the appeal of that house was that it was basically built in 1963 for this family, and nobody else had owned it. And they certainly had not maintained it that well. So it was in its original condition which would be what a house would be in if, the original bathrooms were there, the original kitchen was there. That's kind of what appealed to me about it, even though it was kind of a dump, but yeah.
And in terms of fashion?
In terms of fashion, I don't know. I think that for us, it's really important to just keep sort of like to stay in our lane. And because there's so many trends going on at the same time in the fashion industry. And I think that part of the reason why we are still here as a small company 31 years later is because we have kind of kept true to who we are. I think there's been some ups and downs in how true we have been to who we are, but I think that, this year I feel like everything seems to be clicking, and I think our imagery looks really good, and I think that the sense of optimism comes through, which to me is really important in a time when there is some crazy stuff going on in the world, and optimism is a very important thing. So I kind of feel like our job at Trina Turk is to do what we do as well as we can do it, and to, take advantage of, I think in fashion, one of the things that moves you forward is what is happening with technology in textiles and in printing. So I think that, textiles are such an important part of what we do, and I think that textiles really lead the way for where we're going to go.
And will you continue shooting your collections in mid-century?
Yes,
house?
Of course. I think so, because I kind of feel like now at this point, if we were to do something different, it would feel off.
But are there any houses you haven't shot yet?
There are many, many houses we have not shot in yet. There's a huge list of houses that we haven't shot. Between here and Los Angeles, there's hundreds.
Okay. Well, so to be continued. Thank you, Trina. Thank you,
Christine.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you have still some time to wander in exhibition and linger over the table, which is dedicated to Trina. And if you haven't been to Soleil House, there's still opportunity, right, to do so.
Palm Springs Life is running tours, and the last 2 days are the last 2 Saturdays of March.
Voila, you know what to do. Thank you, everyone, and I hope we see you soon again.
Thank you.